I've always found comfort in my art, or rather, in the quiet space it gives me to lose myself. My studio was my sanctuary, my escape from the world, from the noise, from the failure that seemed to follow me everywhere. Every inch of the room was cluttered with half-finished canvases, tubes of dried paint, and brushes that I hadn't cleaned in ages. The smell of oil paint hung heavy in the air, thick like smoke. But no matter how many strokes I added to the canvas, no matter how much time I poured into the work, it always felt like something was missing. A piece of me was absent. I stood there, staring at the mess I had created, a mixture of dull colors on the canvas before me. It didn't look like anything. It didn't look like me. My heart sank. Again, I had failed. But then something caught my eye, something shiny, something out of place. It was a faint glimmer, like a sliver of moonlight breaking through the clouds. I turned slowly, my pulse quickening for reasons I couldn't understand. There, in the corner of the room, stood a large mirror I'd never noticed before. It wasn't just any mirror. The frame was twisted. Dark wood carved into shapes that looked almost alive. Vines that wrapped and curled like something growing from the earth. Faces peering out from the edges, contorted in agony or laughter. The glass, though, it was perfect. Too perfect. It didn't reflect the chaos of my studio or the dust settled over everything. The reflection was clear, unnaturally clear, and as I stared at it, something inside me shifted. I don't know why I reached out to it, but I did. My fingers brushed the cold surface, and an electric shock shot through me. It wasn't painful, but it made my chest tighten in a way I couldn't explain. My body felt like it was being pulled toward the glass, as though it were calling me, whispering my name. And that's when I saw her, the woman in the mirror. At first, I thought it was me. The reflection was so perfect, so beautiful, so alive. I could hardly recognize myself in her, dressed in a lavish red gown, her posture tall and regal. She was standing in a gallery, surrounded by admirers. The kind of life I had always wanted. The kind of life I could never seem to grasp. My heart pounded in my chest. This wasn't just a reflection. It was a vision of everything I had dreamed of. Everything I had longed for but had never achieved. My fingers gripped the edge of the mirror. I didn't dare blink, didn't dare pull my gaze away. This life, this version of me, it was everything. Her confidence, her success, her grace. It was as if she had it all, without even trying. Then, just as quickly as the image had appeared, something shifted. A shadow moved behind her, me, or someone else, someone I didn't recognize. A woman, her hair dark and wild, her eyes cold and empty. She stood just behind my reflection, and though I couldn't hear her, I could feel her presence. It was like she was watching me, waiting. I blinked. She was gone. The reflection was perfect again, but the feeling, the unease, lingered. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the glass, but when I finally turned away, the room felt wrong. Empty. The studio, my sanctuary, had faded into the background. All that mattered now was the mirror, the life it showed me, the life I wanted. And then I heard a voice. His voice. "Sophia?" I snapped out of the trance, spinning around. Liam stood in the doorway, his face a mix of concern and confusion. His eyes flicked from me to the mirror, his brow furrowed. "What are you doing with that thing?" His voice was soft, but there was an edge to it. A warning. I couldn't answer right away. My mouth felt dry. The woman in the mirror, I, was still there, still perfect, still smiling back at me. I could hear the faint sounds of laughter, distant conversations, like a party or a gallery opening. My reflection, That reflection looked so real. I don't know, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I can't stop looking at it. Liam stepped closer, his gaze sharp, though there was tenderness in his voice. That's not you, Sophia. It's not real. But as he spoke, I could hardly hear him. The mirror was calling to me, pulling me back. The reflection of myself, the other me, was everything I had ever wanted. Everything I thought I could never have. I wanted it so badly it ached in my chest. I shook my head slowly, barely able to tear my eyes away. It feels real, Liam. This is who I'm supposed to be. Liam took a step forward, his hand reaching out, but I pulled away, unable to look at him. All that mattered now was the reflection. It felt like the mirror understood me in a way no one ever had. I had been searching for this, searching for myself, and it was finally right there in front of me. I don't know how much time passed. Maybe seconds, maybe minutes. But when I finally blinked and looked back, I was no longer sure where I ended and the reflection began. The reflection was perfect. It wasn't me. I couldn't even recognize myself in her. But it was everything I'd ever dreamed of. And then, through the dim reflection, I saw something darker. A flicker. The shadow of the woman who had been watching me earlier. She was in the glass again, her eyes locked onto mine, burning with something cold, something hungry. My heart dropped. I couldn't breathe. I tried to step back, to pull away, but my feet wouldn't move. It was as if I was glued to the floor, trapped in a gaze I couldn't escape. Liam's voice cut through the haze, panic creeping into his tone. "Sophia, snap out of it. This thing, it's messing with you." But I couldn't hear him. All I could see was the woman in the mirror, the version of me who had it all. She was waiting, she was beckoning. And in that moment I realized that it wasn't just a reflection, it was a promise. It was a version of me that was willing to do anything, anything at all, to claim that perfect life. "I have to have this," I whispered, my voice trembling with need. I couldn't look away. And as I reached out again, I knew I wasn't just touching the glass. I was touching the life I'd always wanted. And it was waiting for me. I had always found solace in my art. My studio, cluttered with half-finished canvases and the faint scent of oil paint, was my sanctuary. A place where I could escape the doubts and failures that seemed to follow me everywhere. I spent countless hours there, losing myself in the strokes of my brush, desperately trying to capture something I couldn't quite define. But no matter how much I worked, how many hours I poured into each piece, something was always missing. My work, my life, felt like an endless cycle of failure. The world outside my studio felt so distant, so unreachable. And no matter how hard I tried, the recognition I craved, the validation I needed, seemed to slip further away with each passing day. One night, when I was on the verge of giving up, I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, a flicker of reflection. But when I turned, I saw it clearly. A large, ornate mirror standing in the corner of the room, partially hidden behind stacks of unfinished work. I don't know how I had missed it before, but there it was, looming in the shadows. The frame was like nothing I had ever seen. Dark wood, intricately carved with twisting vines and strange faces. Their features seemed to shift, their eyes following me as I approached. It was beautiful, in a way, but there was something about it that felt wrong. The glass was smooth, untouched by time, reflecting the room in a way that seemed too perfect, too still. I didn't know why I was drawn to it, but I couldn't look away. I reached out, my fingers trembling as they grazed the cold surface. The moment my skin made contact, a jolt shot up my arm, sharp and sudden. It wasn't painful, but it was enough to make my breath catch in my throat. I pulled my hand away quickly, but something inside me, something deep and insistent, urged me to come closer. What was it? Why did it feel so alive? I hesitated for a moment, my heart racing. And then I looked into the mirror. At first, it was just my reflection staring back at me. But something wasn't right. My reflection was different. The woman in the glass was me, but she wasn't. She was radiant, dressed in a flowing red gown, her hair perfectly styled, her posture proud and unshakable. She was standing in a bright, expansive gallery, surrounded by admirers. My art, my work, hung on the walls, and people were looking at me with awe, their eyes filled with admiration. I didn't understand. It didn't make sense. This wasn't my life. This wasn't my reality. But as I stared at the woman in the mirror, I felt an intense longing, a hunger to be her, to live in that world, to be celebrated, to finally be seen. I tried to step back, to shake off the strange feeling growing inside me, but my feet wouldn't move. The mirror's pull was too strong, too consuming. I leaned closer, my fingers brushing the surface of the glass again, and that's when I saw it. The figure behind me. She was barely a shadow at first, standing just beyond my reflection. But as I looked harder, I could make out her features. She had dark, tangled hair, her eyes hollow and black, and a smile that didn't reach her lips. She was staring at me, watching me, waiting. I felt my stomach twist in fear, but the voice in my mind, the reflection's voice, pushed the fear aside. You could have it all. You deserve it. I pulled away, snapping back to reality, my chest tight. My heart pounded in my ears as I stumbled backward, feeling disoriented, disconnected. It felt like the room was spinning. My breath came in shallow gasps. Sophia? Liam's voice cut through the haze. He was standing in the doorway, looking at me with wide, concerned eyes. I turned toward him, but my eyes kept darting back to the mirror. Look at it, I whispered, almost pleading. Liam, look, this is what I've always wanted. This is everything I've ever dreamed of. Liam stepped closer, his eyes scanning the mirror, then landing on me. He frowned, his expression darkening with concern. Sophia, that's not you. It's not real. But it felt real. It was real. The reflection, that woman in the glass, I was her. I knew it in my bones. This was who I was meant to be. This was the life I was meant to have. I shook my head, pulling away from Liam's outstretched hand. I don't care, I whispered, my voice trembling with something between awe and desperation. This is who I am. This is who I should be. Liam's eyes hardened, and I could see the fear in them now. Sophia, stop it. This mirror, it's messing with your head. It's not real. But I couldn't hear him. All I could hear was the soft hum of the mirror, the whisper of my reflection, the promise of everything I had ever wanted. The crowd in the mirror was growing louder, their voices filling my ears. I could almost taste the champagne in my mouth. The world was shifting around me, warping, bending, pulling me in. I reached for the mirror again, my fingers trembling as they brushed against the surface. And then, just as quickly as it had come, everything changed. The woman in the reflection smiled. Not the gentle, confident smile from before, but something darker. Her eyes were cold, and her smile twisted with malice. She wasn't me. She was the other version, the one who had traded everything to get what she wanted. And she was beckoning me to join her. I gasped, stumbling back. What? What's happening? The reflection moved, too quickly, too fluidly, as if it were no longer just a mirror. The woman in the glass stepped forward, crossing the distance between us in an instant. Her smile deepened, her eyes glowing with a dark hunger. "You can be me," she whispered, though her voice wasn't hers. It was colder, empty. "You can have everything you've ever wanted. All you have to do is step through." I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The desire, the hunger, the need. It was overwhelming. It was consuming me. But then, in the back of my mind, I heard it. A warning. A voice, distant and weak, whispering to me, "This isn't you. This isn't what you want. Don't listen. Don't fall for it." But it was too late. I reached out again, my hand shaking as I touched the glass. And as I did, I felt something pull at me. Something dark. Something old. Something that had been waiting for me all along. The reflection of the woman in the mirror smiled wider, her lips curling into a twisted grin. And I realized, too late, that I wasn't just gazing into the mirror. I was stepping into it. I was becoming her. I had always found comfort in my art, or at least I used to. My studio was my sanctuary, the place where I could escape the relentless doubts that gnawed at me. But lately, no matter how much time I spent there, surrounded by brushes and unfinished canvases, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. My work felt incomplete, meandering, lacking the spark I once thought was inherent in my soul. I had lost my way, but everything changed the moment I found the mirror. It wasn't anything grand at first, just a quiet glint in the corner of the room, something I hadn't noticed before. But as I moved closer, I realized how wrong I was. It wasn't just any mirror. The frame was massive. Dark wood, intricately carved with twisted vines. Faces contorted in expressions I couldn't quite place. And the glass, it was pristine, unnaturally so. It felt like it was staring back at me, waiting. I don't know what drew me in, but I couldn't look away. My fingers hovered near the surface of the glass, the chill seeping through my skin the moment I touched it. A shock ran up my arm, sending a jolt through me. I pulled back instinctively, but there was no escaping its pull. I was drawn to it, compelled to look deeper. At first, I thought I was imagining things, but the more I stared, the more the reflection seemed to change. It wasn't just me, standing in my cluttered studio. The woman in the glass was me, but she was more confident, poised, radiant. She stood in a grand gallery, surrounded by admirers, my art on the walls. She was everything I had always dreamed of being. It felt too perfect to be true. My heart raced, my thoughts scrambled. I reached out again, pressing my palm against the mirror's surface as if I could somehow step into that life, into her world. And then, I saw it. Behind her, in the reflection, there was something more, someone else, a woman. Her eyes were hollow, her expression twisted, but her gaze was fixed on me, cold, watching, waiting. I staggered back, my breath shallow, and tried to break the spell that had wrapped around me. But it was too late. The image of the woman lingered, and a voice inside my mind whispered, "You can have everything you've ever wanted. All you need to do is take it." I should have walked away, I know that now. But I didn't. I was obsessed. Each day, I returned to the mirror, drawn deeper into its pull. It wasn't just a reflection anymore, it was a promise. A glimpse of a life that was slipping further away from me, one I could never quite reach on my own. But the woman in the mirror, she had it all. She didn't hesitate. She was confident, radiant, alive. And I wanted to be her. I began to change, though I didn't realize it at first. My art became sharper, more intense. I felt more confident, more in control of the brushstrokes, the colors, the vision. I no longer doubted myself. I was better. But it wasn't just my art that changed, it was me. I started dressing differently, walking taller, speaking with a confidence I had never known. It was as if the reflection had taken root inside me, growing stronger with each passing day. I could see it in the way people looked at me. Strangers on the street would glance at me, and I could almost see the admiration in their eyes, the recognition of something I hadn't earned. But it was there. It was real. The woman in the mirror was no longer a distant dream. She was me, and I was her. But as I moved further into this new life, something darker began to stir inside me. It wasn't just the power, the success, or the admiration. It was something more. Something I couldn't quite name. It was in the way my paintings began to shift. They were no longer just expressions of my thoughts. They were calculated, controlled, perfect. I no longer painted for myself. I painted for them, the critics, the admirers. The reflection of the perfect life I had so desperately desired had become my new reality. But the more I became her, the more I realized something terrifying. The woman in the mirror wasn't just a reflection of what I wanted. She was something else. She wasn't just me. She was the version of me that had sacrificed everything. I didn't know how long I had been standing in front of the mirror that night, but something inside me told me I had crossed a line. The reflection had shifted once more. The woman, the other me, was no longer a distant ideal. She was right there in front of me, watching, waiting. I could feel her, breathing beside me, her presence pressing against my skin, and that's when I realized she wasn't just in the mirror anymore. She was with me. Her smile twisted, and her eyes were filled with a cold, hollow hunger. She wasn't just looking at me, she was consuming me. "You've done well, Sophia," she whispered, her voice like ice against my ear. "You've come so far. But now it's time for you to truly become me." My heart hammered in my chest. I tried to move, to step back, but my feet wouldn't obey. I was paralyzed, staring into the reflection that no longer looked like me. Her smile grew wider, more sinister. "You wanted this, didn't you?" she taunted, stepping closer in the glass. Her eyes gleamed with something dark, something that made my skin crawl. "You wanted to be me. Now you are. You have everything, and yet you are nothing." The words hit me like a blow to the chest. I had wanted it, yes. But now, as I stood there, rooted to the spot, I realized what it cost. I had traded something more precious than I could ever understand to get here, and it was too late to turn back. The reflection, the woman who had once been my dream, was no longer just a reflection. She was inside me now, taking over, twisting me into something else, something darker, something hungry. As the reflection of her grinned back at me, I understood. There was no more room for doubt. The life I had longed for had consumed me. I wasn't me anymore. I was her. And the worst part? I didn't even care. I had always found comfort in my art. Well, used to, I should say. My studio, cluttered with unfinished canvases and tubes of dried paint, was supposed to be my escape. A space where I could lose myself, away from the world's expectations. But lately, I hadn't been able to lose myself in it. My work felt hollow, as though I were merely going through the motions. My brushstrokes lacked the spark they once had, and my passion, if it had ever existed, had burned out long ago. I couldn't quite find my footing. But that all changed the day I found the mirror. It wasn't even something I'd been looking for. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, a glint in the corner of the room. But when I moved closer, I saw it, standing tall against the wall, half hidden behind a stack of old canvases. I hadn't noticed it before, and I couldn't quite explain why. It didn't belong. The frame was large and ornate, carved with twisting vines and faces contorted in expressions I couldn't quite place. Some seemed to smile, while others twisted into looks of agony. The glass was unnaturally smooth, too smooth, and as I stared into it, I felt an odd shiver run down my spine. I reached out instinctively, my fingers brushing the cold surface. The shock that ran through my body wasn't painful, but it was sharp, like an electric current, cutting through the air. I recoiled, startled, but something I couldn't name, urged me to look again. I stepped closer. The reflection I saw wasn't just me, standing there awkwardly in my worn-down studio. No, the woman in the mirror was perfect, radiant. She was wearing a crimson gown, standing tall in a grand art gallery, my work adorning the walls. The room shimmered with soft light, and people, admirers, artists, critics, gathered around, admiring her, envying her. Her eyes sparkled with a confidence I could only dream of, her smile full of power and grace. It was me, but it wasn't. I couldn't breathe. My heart raced as I stared at her, at the life she had. I could almost hear the soft murmur of praise, feel the weight of the champagne flute in my hand, and taste the sweet, heady rush of adoration. It was everything I had ever wanted, everything I had dreamed of, but could never seem to reach. And then, behind her, I saw it. A shadow, dark and fleeting at first, standing just beyond the edges of the reflection. I blinked, but it didn't disappear. It was a woman. Her features were hidden in the shadows, but there was something about her. Her eyes, dark, hollow, locked onto me with a quiet intensity that made my stomach drop. I tried to look away, but it was like my body refused to obey. The woman didn't move, but I could feel her presence. She was standing just behind the perfect version of me, watching, waiting. A voice whispered through my mind, "You want this, don't you? You want her life. You want to be her." I stepped back, the words settling into my bones like poison, but I couldn't move away. I couldn't tear my eyes from the glass. The reflection, the other me, was beckoning. She was everything I had dreamed of becoming. And now I could feel her pull. And that's when it all started. Days passed, and I couldn't stop thinking about the mirror. I returned to it over and over, unable to stay away. I would find myself standing in front of it, staring at the woman who was me but wasn't, longing to be her, to step into her world. The reflection no longer felt like a simple image. It was real, alive, and the more I stared into it, the more I felt it pull me in. The lines between us, me and her, began to blur. My work changed. It wasn't just the brushstrokes, the composition, it was the way I felt. More confident, more certain. I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't second-guessing every move. My art, my life, was finally falling into place. I was becoming the woman in the mirror. I could see it in the way people looked at me. Strangers, friends, family. They all saw something different. They saw her. They saw the version of me that had no doubt, no fear, no hesitation. I could walk into a room and the air would change. I was alive, and they could see it. But as I grew closer to her, I began to feel something darker, something creeping, waiting at the edges of my consciousness. I stood before the mirror again, feeling that familiar tug in my chest. The woman smiled back at me, perfect and poised. But then, again, I saw her, standing just behind the reflection, the shadow, the figure that had been watching me from the corners of my mind. Vivian. The name hit me like a bolt of lightning. It was a name I had heard in whispers, forgotten stories from the studio's previous tenant. A woman who had once stood where I now stood, chasing the same dream, the same hunger. Vivian. She had been the one who had once owned the mirror, the one who had traded everything for success, the one who had paid the price. And now I could feel her in the glass. Her presence pressed against me, cold and suffocating. Sophia. The voice was faint at first, but unmistakable. My skin prickled as I heard it. Familiar, chilling, like a distant memory I couldn't quite place. Sophia, you've done it. You've become me. I recoiled, my breath catching. I tried to move, to turn away, but I couldn't. I was locked there, staring at the glass, feeling the weight of her eyes on me. The woman in the reflection, the other me, remained the same, smiling, confident, poised. But the figure in the shadows, Vivian, she was closer now. I could see her more clearly. Her face was pale, her hair dark and wild. Her eyes, black, hollow, stared into mine. You wanted it, didn't you? Her voice was sharp, biting, cold. You wanted the life I had. You wanted my success. You wanted everything. My chest tightened, a cold sweat breaking out across my skin. No, this wasn't how it was supposed to be. I had wanted her life, yes, but I didn't want this. I didn't want to be her. But it was too late. The woman in the mirror was no longer just a reflection. She was Vivian. She had taken over, consumed me, and I hadn't even realized it. I had wanted her life so badly, and now I was paying the price. You think you've won, Sophia, Vivian whispered, her voice now echoing in my mind. But you're trapped now. You are me. You will always be me. And there's no escape from the mirror. The reflection flickered, and I saw her smile, wide, hungry, cruel. The woman I had once dreamed of becoming had been consumed by the same ambition I now held, and I had become her. There was no turning back. You wanted to be me, Vivian's voice lingered in my mind, and now you are, forever. The mirror trembled, its glass rippling like water, and I knew in that moment that I was lost. I had traded my soul for the life I had dreamed of. But now that it was mine, all that was left was darkness, and the price had been too high. It was supposed to be my sanctuary, the studio where I could escape, let my art breathe, and let my mind wander free. But lately, the walls of this place had begun to feel like a cage, the clutter of unfinished canvases and dried-up brushes pressing down on me, reminding me of all the things I hadn't achieved. The air felt thick, suffocating, and no matter how hard I tried to lose myself in my work, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Something inside me had been slipping away. Then, one evening, I found it. I don't know how I hadn't noticed it before. It stood in the corner of the room, half hidden behind the mess of my abandoned projects. A large, ornate mirror, its frame intricately carved with vines and twisted faces, their eyes following me as I approached. The glass was flawless, too flawless, and it caught the light in a way that made it seem almost alive. I had never seen it there before, yet there it was, as if it had always been a part of the room, waiting for me. At first, I only meant to glance at it, but the moment I looked into the glass I was paralyzed. The reflection that stared back at me wasn't me, not in the way I was used to seeing myself. No, the woman in the mirror was radiant, confident, dressed in a deep red gown, standing in an art gallery surrounded by admirers. My artwork, my creations, hung on the walls, and the room was filled with people staring at me, at her, with awe and admiration. She was everything I had ever dreamed of being. Everything I had ever wanted. It was intoxicating. I reached out without thinking, my fingers trembling as they brushed against the cold surface of the glass. A sharp, electric shock ran through my body, not painful but unsettling, like an invisible thread pulling me closer. I jerked back, feeling dizzy, and yet I couldn't stop looking. The woman in the reflection was so perfect. She wasn't me, but she was. She had my face, my body, but she was something more. She was confident, successful, admired. and the longer I stared, the more she seemed to call to me. I wanted to be her. I needed to be her. And that was when I felt it. A presence behind me in the mirror. A shadow, darker than the rest, standing just behind my perfect reflection. I turned, but no one was there. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, something that wasn't me. I should have walked away, but I didn't. The pull was too strong. Every time I went back to the mirror, the reflection drew me in more. I couldn't break free. The woman in the glass wasn't just a version of me. I was becoming her. But then things started to change. At first, it was subtle. My art improved, my hand steadied. I was no longer second-guessing every brushstroke. My work had a clarity, a purpose it had never had before. I painted with confidence, knowing exactly what I wanted to say, and people noticed. They began to look at me differently, like they could see the shift in me before I even understood it myself. I didn't recognize myself anymore. The version of me in the mirror, the woman I had once only dreamed of, had taken over. I stood taller, spoke with authority, smiled at strangers and felt their eyes linger on me. But as I changed, something inside me began to shift as well. It was like I was slipping further into someone else's skin, and I didn't know how to stop it. My thoughts became less my own. I stopped caring about the small things, the things that had once mattered, the people who cared for me, the work I used to cherish for its imperfections, the things that had once anchored me. They all faded into the background, replaced by her. I was becoming her. But then, one night, as I stood before the mirror, I saw it again, that shadow, the figure behind the reflection. Only this time, it wasn't just a flicker. It was her, Vivian. Her name hit me like a dagger, sharp and cold. Vivian had been the mirror's previous owner. She had sacrificed everything for the life I now craved, her soul, her humanity, her past. She had stepped into the reflection and never returned. I could feel her now, inside me. Her presence. It was in the reflection, in the air around me. Cold, suffocating. I couldn't escape her. And that was when I first heard the voice. It wasn't a whisper. It was her. Sophia. Her voice was soft at first, like a cool breeze running through the room, but it was unmistakable. It was Vivian speaking to me through the mirror, through my thoughts. You wanted this, didn't you? You wanted to be me. I froze. My heart raced. The woman in the mirror, Vivian, was no longer just a reflection. She was inside me, her voice curling around my thoughts, urging me to take what she had once taken, to embrace the life she had sold her soul for. But I didn't know if I could. I had wanted everything she had, the success, the power, the life I had dreamed of. But now that it was in my grasp, I wasn't so sure. The more I gave in, the more I lost myself. I could feel it. I was no longer in control. The reflection of the woman in the glass, the woman I had once longed to be, was now a twisted version of myself. I was you, Vivian's voice whispered again, growing louder now, no longer a voice in my head, but everywhere. I traded everything for this, and now you will too. You've become me. You're already trapped, Sophia, just like I was. The cold in the room grew thicker. My reflection, the woman who was once me, was now fully Vivian. Her smile widened, filled with that same hunger, that same emptiness. She was taking over. The life I had craved, the success I had dreamed of, none of it mattered anymore. It was hollow, empty. A cage that would never release me. And I knew then. I wasn't going to get out. Not unless I made a choice. There was only one way to break free, to destroy the mirror, to shatter the image, to shatter the life that wasn't truly mine, the life I thought I wanted. But if I did that, I would lose everything, the art, the fame, the power. I would return to the person I had been, the artist who had nothing. The woman in the reflection, Vivian, stared at me with those cold, hollow eyes. "You've come so far," she whispered, her voice thick with finality. "Now you're me. You'll never be able to walk away." I raised the wrench in my hand. My hands were shaking, my breath quick and shallow, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't let her win. Not like this. With a scream, I swung it at the mirror, watching as the glass shattered into 1,000 pieces, each fragment reflecting a version of the life I had once wanted. A life that wasn't mine. A life that would never be. I stood there, panting, surrounded by the shattered remnants of the mirror. The reflection was gone, but the shards glistened, each piece showing a glimpse of the perfect life I had thought I wanted. But now, with the glass broken, I saw it for what it truly was. An illusion. A dark promise I had been foolish enough to believe. I had shattered the mirror, but the pieces, the shards, still glimmered with that same temptation. And as I looked at the broken glass, I saw it. A flicker of the woman, the other me, still smiling in the shattered fragments, waiting, watching. She wasn't gone, not really, and I knew in that moment that she never would be.